Good.
Can you see me? Yeah?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh,
Perfect.
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Yeah, I think we can start now, Rabbi, if you don't mind.
Wonderful. Sure, of course.
Thank you.
So, I think...
Let me do some introduction, then I'll pass it.
Sure.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to everyone, especially to our invited guest, Honorable Rabbi Mordechai Abigail, Chief Rabbi of Singapore. Thank you very much, Rabbi, on behalf of our department and also our students for your time this afternoon to share with us on Judaism. Together with us today is Dr. Fatmi Shehu. He is also another course instructor for World Religion 1. Both of us are teaching this course, and the students are also learning about Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. I think, Rabbi, you may introduce a little bit about yourself. As far as I know, you have been in Singapore for quite some time. And we met last year, Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much for accepting me to visit your synagogue. And if you remember that you say something about wanting to talk to the students, so here we go.
Wonderful.
I think the blessing in disguise of this COVID thing, we can meet online.
Yes.
And you are able to meet our students who are really eager, want to know more about Judaism. So I think without any further ado, I'll pass the session to you, Rabbi. We have around 1 hour for your presentation, and we will listen questions from our students for the remaining half an hour. Over to you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for organizing the session, to you, of course, and the entire faculty. I think it's very, very significant that we can have this sort of dialogue, open dialogue, across different communities of faith, across different religions, in an attempt to understand each other better, to understand the very basic tenets of another's faith, which I think is the very, very basic foundation of any sort of normal interaction between different human beings, because I personally believe religion is at the core of our sense of meaning and purpose in life. And I think, as much as science could tell us how things work in the universe, they can't tell us why. And this question, why, that is only in the realm, in the bosom of religion. It is only there in the nest of religious belief that you find the real answers to meaning in life. So I think, it's a blessed initiative. Thank you very, very much. I've had the amazing opportunity to be involved in this work. I mean, it's one of the things I do, but, certainly I think in my 26 years in Singapore, I've had this unprecedented ability to meet people of all creeds, all faiths, all backgrounds, all religions. And it's enriched me personally, I can tell you that. And it's really allowed me to also share with my colleagues, many of whom are rabbis and spiritual leaders overseas, of the importance of doing the same, of trying to emulate this example, this model that we have, not only in Singapore, but also in the region. I've had quite a few encounters in Indonesia, in Malaysia, where I used to travel because of COVID. Unfortunately, it had to stop. I hope we could resume again very soon. But we have something very special going on here in our region. I think we have to cherish it. We have to nurture it. We have to maintain it and make it grow, to grow the common ground together. So that's very, very significant. And I wanted to say that from the outset, how meaningful that is and how important that is. Our community here in Singapore is the oldest in Southeast Asia. In fact, in Asia, the only really community that is still extant from the descendants of the first settlers who came to Singapore as early as 180 years ago, so which is quite some time. Most of these Jews who came to settle in Singapore came from Iraq, from Baghdad, from Basra, from Mosul, from different places in the Middle East, and that is significant because they were obviously from that cultural background in the Middle East, which allowed for a lot of cross interaction with Muslims, with Arabs living in these societies, which something that had a lot of impact. I think I myself my parents were born and raised in Morocco, so I have that background, I have that culture as well, and I have an appreciation for historically how Jews and Muslims were able to live in peace and harmony together over the ages, much more so than in Christian Europe, which of course is I'm sure is no secret to you. Most of you would be familiar with that aspect of history. So all these things kind of lock in together, but we have limited time, so I'm going to try to get to business, as they say. There are quite a few topics that we need to go through, so I'm going to try to be succinct. I'm going to try to really make it as brief and abridged as possible, but later on, please feel free to ask whatever questions in order to elaborate. So I think that part of this overview would be an historical background. And so in terms of the history of the Jewish people, of course, it begins with the creation of the world and the creation of Adam. Adam and Chava, as we call them, the first man, the first woman. We Jews are creationists. So that is to say, we believe God created the world. We make no apologies for it. We, of course, believe that science is not an impediment and an obstacle to faith, and that in fact, being that God created the universe, it must be that science must perforce be in harmony with any scientific approach and any scientific breakthrough. And so therefore, for example, when the Bible says the world was created in 6 days, we believe that in fact it was so. Whether you could explain this in different ways, in different interpretations, that is that's a topic of a whole big different discussion, but I just wanted to say that at the outset. So Adam and Eve begin the history of mankind, and 10 generations later you have Noah. Of course, Noah with the history of the flood and the destruction of the entire known world at that time. It's basically pushing the reset button and a new beginning, and that was important. That was important because it sets the pace for a completely different course of history, which comes 10 generations later after Noah, which means 20 generations from Adam. You have Abraham, and Abraham basically discovers monotheism, or I should say rediscovers monotheism, because in fact Adam was a prophet in our tradition, and he was the handiwork. He was created by God himself, and God communicated with him, as is clear to us anyway in Jewish tradition. It's the same as well and so Abraham basically, the difference between him and all the others who preceded him, because there were great upright and righteous people before him, but what made Abraham unique is that he felt the need not to keep this for himself. He shared the idea. He proclaimed to anyone that would want to know that there is a God that created the universe, and that we are all subservient to him, and that we have to worship him, and so on and so forth. And so Abraham, in that sense, propagates the faith. He feels a mandate to go out there and to teach it, and to get people to understand that ultimately their lives revolve on the service of a supreme being, of a God that is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. So Abraham is really, in that sense, the founder of the Jewish faith, you might say. However, However, it is not until his grandson Jacob that we find the story of the Jewish people unfolding. Jacob has 12 children, each one begetting children and descendants, which will form the 12 tribes, which constitute the entirety of the Jewish people. Jacob, as all of you are familiar with the biblical narrative, Jacob's son Joseph is sold as a slave, and he becomes the viceroy. The Jewish people go down to Egypt, or the family of Jacob, 70 souls, they go down to Egypt. They stay there for 210 years, come out of Egypt, are redeemed, and will at that time, really for the first time, be referred as a Jewish people, as a Jewish nation. So that's the birth, you might say, of the Jewish people as a nation. 50 days later, after the Exodus, after coming out of Egypt, there was the revelation on Mount Sinai, which is when God revealed himself to the Jewish people. He revealed himself in front of not just to Moses, but to the entirety of the Jewish people. Men, women, children, elderly, babies, everyone saw it. Everyone heard it. And that is of extreme significance to us, of course, because that is the moment when we became Jewish, which means that's the moment we entered in a covenant with God, which again is significant also because that's when we have the birth of the Jewish faith. So you have the birth of the Jewish nation that happens in Egypt, right? Out of 70 souls of Jacob and his children and grandchildren, we now have an entire nation. Yes, that's true. But when the Judaism come into the fore, it came to the fore with a revelation on Mount Sinai. Now that's a very important point again, because in contrast with other faiths, which rely on the vision to a single person, the idea of revelation to the Jews is that God did not reveal himself to one person, share the vision or revelation to one person, but rather to an entire nation, which is why Jews have been very stubborn. We're called a stiff-necked people. And everyone tried to convert us. Everyone tried to we were persecuted for it. We were, I should say, murdered and massacred for it because we did not accept that another faith should be our faith. Why is that? Because we believe that God revealed himself to the entire nation, to the entire Jewish people. And basically, in short, if he changed his mind, then he has to come to all of us again, right? It doesn't work that you have to go now, you have a vision to one person, and from that vision, we have to change everything. So that explains a little bit why we're very, we believe that there are different paths to religion, to spirituality, to serving God, and everyone should do it their own way. I should say from the outset as well that Judaism doesn't believe in proselytizing, in converting other people. In fact, it's a sin in our tradition to try to persuade another person to change his faith. So we believe that if a person is born a Christian, he's meant to be a Christian. If he was born a Muslim, he's meant to be a Muslim. And if he's a Jew, he's meant to be a Jew. So we're happy for everyone to have their faith and their religion. And that's an important thing that happens during the revelation on Mount Sinai, which basically is the idea that our Torah, as far as we're concerned, as far as Jews are concerned, is a revelation that is eternal, that is immutable, that is not given to change. And so, by the way, that's the difference that there is between different approaches to Judaism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you have what every one of you probably has heard about: Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews. The very basic difference between these denominations, because they're just words, but what it basically means is that the question really is, what exactly happened on Sinai? You see, so if you say that the entirety, the corpus of the entire Torah, which is, when I speak about a Torah, I mean to say the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the scriptures of the Old Testament, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament, and that we call the Torah, which is the word I will continue to use to make it easier. So our Torah comprises 24 books in total. The first 5 are called the Pentateuch, and that is the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in these 5 books, you have 613 commandments and all their derivatives. And this is what we believe a Jew has to observe. And this is something that is not given to change. This is something that we believe as Orthodox Jews, that revelation is eternal and not given to change. Those who don't profess that belief, like, for example, conservative and Reform Jews, they will say that that revelation on Sinai is something that was processed, it was interpreted by a human being, by a prophet, and therefore certain elements of it may have been relevant then, but some of it are not relevant today, which is why, for example, Reform Jews will, some of them will eat kosher, like what the Muslim call halal, by us it's called kosher, the kosher dietary laws, and others won't do it because they say it's not relevant. We keep the Sabbath as a holy day. They'll say, well, that's not necessary. You can choose to observe it the way you want, and so on and so forth, because they go back to that moment at Sinai, that revelation. Is it something that happened there that was truly eternal? Was it the word of God, unadulterated, that revelation that came straight from the Almighty? Or is it something that was reinterpreted and processed by human intellect? And that, I think, is really the difference that there is between these different approaches to Judaism. Again, I'm really making it very abbreviated, very abridged. So I wanted to touch on that, very important. To continue very briefly on the overview, the historical background, what you have is the formation of the first Jewish Commonwealth. When the Jewish people enters the Holy Land, the temple is built by Solomon, by King Solomon, the son of King David, and is going to be destroyed by the Babylonians, will be destroyed by the Babylonians 4 centuries later, approximately. Jews will be exiled in Babylon, only to return 7 years later. The second temple has been built and will be destroyed by the Romans in the year 69 of the Common Era, just to give you an idea. And ever since, the Jews have been exiled to literally the 4 corners of the known world. And, you know, you might say that really to be a Jew is something that is a multifaceted idea, which means to say Jews are a product of the diaspora, right? It is only since 1948 that Jews were able to go back again to their ancestral homeland and to go back to really where they came from. But that is a recent phenomenon, and you still have millions of Jews who live outside of the boundaries of the Holy Land. But that's, again, a topic for itself. To get down to the theology, because I think this is another item that you're interested to hear about. So I will bring it down to the 13 principles of faith that were enunciated by Maimonides. Now, Maimonides is a Jewish thinker who was very important to us because he was not only a great scholar, he was also a philosopher, he was a doctor, he was an astronomer, he was a man of the sciences, but a person who was loyal to Jewish tradition and a transmitter of Jewish tradition. There's some people want to appropriate the identity of Maimonides and say that, you know, he was not really Jewish and so on and so forth, which is, of course, to us, total, utter nonsense to say something like this. It's very clear from his writing exactly where he stands anyway. So I think I'll put that to rest. But he basically brings down the tenets of the Jewish belief, the 13 important points, which I will go briefly through with you so you have an understanding of what's essential to Jewish belief. There's much more, but just what's essential. So the first one is, of course, the belief in the existence of a creator who is perfect in every manner and the primary cause of all existence. Now, what does this mean? What it means basically is that the Almighty, what we call God, does not have an antecedent. There is nothing that precedes him. His existence is from himself. That is what we believe. So which means to say, in as much as, for example, our existence begins somewhere else, it is our parents that conceived us and brought us into being with, of course, the grace of God. That is true. But Nevertheless, there is an antecedent. When we speak about God, God has no antecedent. And he is the real fabric of existence, the entire universe. There is nothing that is outside of him. There's no power that is outside of God. Everything is brought about and created by the Almighty. There's a whole mystical tradition as to how the world was brought into being, about the nature of the soul. What is the soul? Why did the soul come down to this world? You know, I tell you, I wish we could elaborate on all this. These are vast topics and disciplines of discussion. So I'm just going to bring it as short as possible. There is the idea of the belief, and that's the second tenet, the belief in God's absolute unity. So, you know, there's no Trinity. There is no idea of, again, as I mentioned, another power that is associated or in partnership with God, so to speak. There is no such thing. So in some traditions, you have this idea of a Satan that is, you know, where the Satan has an opinion. Satan has no opinion. In our tradition, Satan is an angel, like any other angel. That's all. He's got a very big job as an angel, but he's an angel created by God as a created being. That's an important thing. The third tenet is really important as well, because it speaks about the belief in a God that is not corporeal, that he's not affected by any of the physical occurrences. He's not affected. He's completely transcendent of all physical occurrences. And of course, the eternity of the Almighty, that's the fourth tenet, and the imperative to worship God and only God and no other being or body or false gods or whatever it may be. The sixth tenet is the belief that God communicates to man through prophecy, that he appoints his servants, his loyal servants, to be agents to spread his word to mankind. And of course, Moses, that we call the master of all prophets, in our Bible, in our Torah, it says that Moses was such a great prophet that there's none like him that preceded him, and there's none like him that will come later. That will come late into the world. There'll be no one like Moses. His prophecy is supreme, right? There is there is the belief in the divine origin of the Torah, as I explained. The divine origin meaning to say that there was a revelation on Mount Sinai. God revealed the Torah to the Jewish people. That is something that is divine in origin. That the Torah is immutable, as we explained before, as I mentioned before. The idea of God's omniscience, that God is basically of infinite awareness, right? That's another idea of infinite understanding and insight, another idea about God. There is the belief in reward and retribution, which means to say everything we do has consequences. The smallest little act has repercussions that has ripple effects throughout the entire universe. It's an important thing. The 12th tenet of belief is the belief in the arrival of a Messiah that will redeem the whole world. And so the belief in the Messiah basically is this idea that the world has a purpose, that in as much as the world was created with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in a state of perfection, the world will return to that state of perfection, to a level where the awareness of the divine will permeate the entire known world. Every aspect of creation will be suffused with the presence of God. It will be felt tangibly almost. And so that's what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. The Messiah in our tradition is a scion, a descendant of the Davidic dynasty of King David through King Solomon. And he's not a being with wings that's going to fall from heaven. He is a human being that is there in every generation. If the generation is worthy, he will reveal himself at the sign of God. God will bring it about, and if not, then he won't reveal himself. So this is something, of course, we're still waiting for. And the 13th tenet of belief is the resurrection of the dead. We believe that ultimately all those who slumber in the dust, all those who have passed on, will again be brought back. And of course, how does that add up with overpopulation? I don't know, but that's the reason why this is an item of belief. This is the reason why this concept is not shared to us as an intellectual idea that is comprehended, but rather as something that we are asked to believe, right? To believe in. And so here you have, in short, the basic tenets of the Jewish faith. And that's an important thing because, I mentioned here in short what these what these concepts are, but they have many ramifications. Like, for example, if I believe in reward and punishment, that basically means to say that I believe in freedom of choice. Because if I don't believe in freedom of choice, how can I punish someone or how can I reward him if he is no more than a machine, basically pre-programmed to act in a specific way? Then how do I hold him accountable and liable? And so therefore, the idea of freedom of choice is central. It's a central tenet, which again is a ramification of that item of belief that I mentioned about the belief in reward and punishment. Of course, there's the philosophical question that is asked that, if really there's freedom of choice, then how does it add up with a God that is eternal and that is omniscient, that is infinite awareness, as we said before, who knows the future and the past and knows what we're going to do? God's knowledge is not like our knowledge. So if he knows what we're going to do, it must happen. And if it has to happen, then we don't really have freedom of choice. That's a major discussion, a point for a major discussion. But the idea is still, as Maimonides himself tells, I mentioned Maimonides, he explains and says, although we cannot understand, our mind cannot grasp and reconciliate the idea of God's knowledge and supreme infinite awareness and our freedom of choice. We can't reconcile between two because they don't make sense. But nevertheless, Maimonides says, so must we believe that it is the will of God that we should act with our own freedom of choice and be held accountable for whatever it is we choose to do or not do, to follow the will of God as shared in his Torah. Our Torah, as mentioned before, has 613 commandments, which can be subdivided into three categories. Again, very loosely for in the interest of time. We have laws that relate to festivals and holidays. So we have the Sabbath, which is on Saturday, starting from Friday sunset until Saturday nightfall. It's a day when we have to refrain from 39 particular forms of labors. Like, for example, creating a fire is not allowed on the Sabbath, but also to use electricity, which is a byproduct of fire, you might say, or a form of fire. And so that would be, for example, the reason why Jews don't use any electrical appliances on the Sabbath. We don't drive, we don't use elevators, computers, we don't flick the light on, and so on and so forth. All of this is prepared in advance, so we're not inconvenienced. Our food is cooked from before the Sabbath, and so on and so forth. Just giving a few examples so you understand basically what it is. You have the Sabbath, but you also have the festivals. You have the Jewish New Year, which we had about 2 months ago. The Jewish New Year is then followed 10 days later by the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, which is the most sacred day of the year, very solemn days. And then we have a festival of Sukkot, which is the Festival of Tabernacles, which is a commandment that is linked to the Exodus from Egypt. It's a festival that is linked to the Exodus from Egypt. Then we have Passover, which celebrates the Exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt as well. A Festival of Weeks, as it's called, happens 50 days later, which celebrates the revelation on Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. There are minor festivals, Chanukah, Purim. These are festivals that commemorate a specific event in Jewish history, where Jews were also freed from the shackles of the bondage or persecution of other nations. In the case of Chanukah, it happened in the 2nd century before the Common Era, where Jews threw the yoke of the Greeks away, who decreed on them not to live as Jews. And Purim happened in ancient Persia, where Jews were threatened with total annihilation and were subsequently saved at the last moment. Also, something that you can find in the Bible in the Scroll of Esther, which is a fascinating story. And I'll just stop here for the holidays. We have the Jewish dietary laws, which basically tell us what it is that a Jew can eat, what is fit for consumption, what is not. And we believe that, person is what he eats, right? And so that means to say that there are certain spiritual traits that you have in the food which can be counterproductive, which can actually impact the person negatively, hurt their spirituality, so to speak, as Jews, again. And so we may not, for example, partake of blood, right? So after you take an animal and you slaughter only those animals that are fit for consumption, which means beef or lamb and so on and so forth, everything else is pretty much out, and deer maybe. But after an animal is slaughtered according to Jewish law with a knife that is exceedingly sharp and smooth, the meat must be drained from its blood and salted, and then after this washed, and only then is it fit for consumption. It's a very elaborate process. We cannot mix dairy and meat together. It's another example of the dietary laws. In terms of seafood, only fish with fins and scales are fit for consumption, nothing else, no other seafood. Many other laws in the dietary laws, which mean that today, because we live in a world with very advanced food technologies, we need to really go back to the source. So we have what we call kosher certification, which means to say that there are kosher agencies that go and inspect the actual processing of food, just like you have in the halal in the halal certification boards. They do the same thing. We go all the way back to the very, very raw material state of every ingredient to determine whether or not this is something that is compliant with the kosher protocols or not. So this is in terms of the kosher dietary laws. We also have laws that have to do with ritual purity, okay, which is a whole part of the Torah, which today is not, a lot of it is no longer relevant, because these laws were extant when the temple stood in Jerusalem. We believe, of course, that one day it will be rebuilt when the Messiah will come. But until then, these laws are no longer practiced. Some of them are, but the bulk of them are not practiced, as in fact are the laws of the sacrifices and so on and so forth, which are no longer practiced because our temple is not yet rebuilt. So you have 613 commandments. As I explained before, you have many ramifications, many details, offshoots of these 613 commandments, which are interpreted in what we call the oral tradition. So we believe that when Moses received the written Torah, the written word, which was dictated by God himself, together with that came an oral interpretation of these laws, which was then transmitted orally from generation to generation. And that is an important thing, because this oral tradition was committed to writing only in the 2nd century of the Common Era, much, much later, obviously, only because it was threatened with extinction. The sages then believed that if they were not going to commit that oral tradition down in writing, it will be lost. And that's the reason why they redacted some of it so that it doesn't get lost. And over the generation, more of it has been committed to writing. We call that, again, the oral tradition, which comprises what you may have heard as the Babylonian Jerusalem Talmud, and the various midrashim, homiletical, different explanations, interpretations, and the body of course, the Jewish legal codes, which stem from the Talmud, and with the various commentaries and relevant interpretations. We call that basically the corpus of rabbinic tradition or rabbinic literature. This would, I guess, summarize a little bit the extent of our tradition, our religious tradition. In terms of the main rites and rituals, perhaps what I could mention here is a short overview of what is a day like in the life of a Jew. And really here, I want to bring a very, very essential point, I think, in order to understand what it means to be Jewish. I'm sure this is the object of this lecture, so that's the reason why I want to take that apart and explain really the different elements of it. So when a Jew gets up in the morning, first thing he does is he opens his eyes, right? And this is part of Jewish law. This is what every observant Jew does, what traditional Jew does. They open their eyes and they say a prayer. What is that prayer? Modeh ani. I thank God for giving me back my soul. That's the first thing I do, right? After I'm done with this, the next thing I have to do is to wash my hands, which is preferably next to your bed. So you did not even put your hands, your feet down the floor. You have to wash your hands. That's the first thing you do, right? And after you do this, you of course use the bathroom, the restroom, whatever it is you decide to do. We'll take a shower and so on and so forth. And after this, you get dressed. When you get dressed, you have to get dressed in a very specific manner. So, for example, you put your shirt, because in our tradition, you have to put the upper garments first, the lower garments first. When you put a shirt, you have to put the right arm first, the left arm second. And after this, the pants, the same way. Right leg first, left leg second. You put your shoes, first the right shoe, then the left shoe. If you have laces, first you have to tie the laces of the left shoe and then the right shoe. So it's quite confusing. You have to make a blessing on everything you eat. You have a cup of water, you must make a blessing before and a blessing after. If you have cakes, anything that's made out of flour, there is a grace that you have to recite afterwards, which is a bit longer, not just a simple blessing. If you have a meal with bread, you have to say a whole grace of 4 blessings afterwards. What I'm basically saying is that everything is governed by a spiritual regimen, everything. So, meaning to say that down to what you speak, right? For example, gossip is a very serious sin in Judaism. And so gossip means to say any word that is totally either defamatory or slanderous, or sometimes even if it's the truth, but is something that is derogatory to the other person, may not be pronounced. So that what that basically says is that a Jew has to be in sync with the 613 commandments in thought, speech, and deed every second, every moment of the day. And that is, that is something which basically means, and I'm going to put this in one sentence because that I think will give you an idea of what I mean, which is that in the conception of life in Judaism, our lives revolve around our Judaism. Our Judaism does not revolve around our life. You do not pray only when it's comfortable or when you want, when you feel like it. The idea of, for example, prayer, we pray 3 times a day. That has to happen in very specific times, like it is in Islam, as of course I'm familiar with. And so the idea, for example, of prayer in Judaism, by the way, prayer is an English word which has got nothing to do with the Hebrew and Jewish concept of prayer, because the word for prayer in Hebrew, which is pronounced tefillah, basically means to connect with God, to connect with the Almighty. And that is something every person needs. You need to constantly connect because that is the way the human condition is, right? And so you cannot just compartmentalize in your life moments when you're going to be spiritual or so-called religious, which is a word I don't like at all, by the way. Judaism is not a religion. I believe Islam is also not a religion. I believe it's a way of life. It's a whole approach to creation, to our conception of the Almighty, and so on and so forth. And so another thing which is important here to mention, I think, which is of the utmost importance in Judaism, is that what Judaism is, and I think, unfortunately these days people conceive of religion as, I need God, so I pray to him. Whenever I need something, I approach God. So that means to say you are religious or you are spiritual only when there is a specific need to be. But if not, then, when you're at the beach enjoying life, where's God, right? Our idea in Judaism is not so much that we need God, but that God needs us. Now you're going to tell me what kind of ridiculous proposition is this? How can God need us? But the best proof that he needs us is that he created the world and the human being. Because if really there is no consequence to our existence, then why did he create us? So obviously he desires to have a dwelling place in this world below. That's what he desires. Why that is, that I don't know. But that is his wish. That is his will. That is his desire. And so when I say that God needs us, there's something very unique in that relationship, right? Which answers many questions, by the way, because, you know, many philosophers struggle with this idea of prayer, because the whole idea that you, an insignificant created being, can actually pray and asking God for anything, a God that is transcendent, that is infinite, is ridiculous. Why should he listen to you? What are we? Who are we that we can actually affect any sort of a change in his will? And yet you see that prayer works. We believe that here we are in this world and we're able to impact the Godhead, as it were. We are able to impact the very essence, core of the divine, that he responds to us. How is that even possible? That is possible because that is what he desires in the most essential way, to have a dwelling place in this world, which means to say a world, our world, where he is really concealed. You don't feel God. You have to make an effort to discover God. But that is what it means, that this is the meaning of what it means to make a dwelling place for God, to reveal his presence, to reveal the divine purpose of creation. So I think this, in short, is what Judaism is all about. I think that I would like, you know, what I really feel is the most important part of a session like this is the questions. And so I may have forgotten things. There may have been some blind spots, but I think with the questions, perhaps we can approach different topics and perhaps answer, I think, and please don't be inhibited. You know, don't be politically correct with me. Ask whatever it is you feel. I think that's really the best way to have a dialogue.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for very enlightening session. I think 45 minutes, you covered almost all, which I have stated in the letter. And I guess our students are waiting for their turn to ask questions. But before that, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Fatmir, to say something, and perhaps he has question. He will start asking questions. Please, Dr. Fatmir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Noor. Thank you very much. So we appreciate very much that you have invited the Chief Rabbi of Singapore and to share this in this session what we have perhaps read from the books. And this is a very good experience that we listen from the mouth of a practicing Jew and who lives according to that religion. So that is very important experience that I myself have experienced today. You know, so many things that in the books we don't see, but now when you listen to someone who lives according to religion of Judaism, then we can appreciate more, you know. And this is like what we have mentioned, the last part. I mean, this is very important when you look at the application. So when you talk about, you said that Judaism is a way of life, then when a Jew lives from the day, every day according to Judaism as a way of life. Now, maybe perhaps I would like, if you would like to elaborate a bit further. So what is the impact of the belief that a Jew has in his day-to-day activities, as well as in his relationship with others? So with that, the way you mentioned, like, will that help him, like the prayers, the belief that he has, will that motivate him to have that kind of appreciation towards others, as well as what others do towards him? So how do you look at it from, I mean, according to the application? When I look at, and another important thing that I would like to appreciate very much, so you made it very clear and you put a kind of distinction between religion. I agree with you, you know, I don't want to use the word religion. So that is not even accepted by Islam, you know, not only by Judaism. So we believe that religion is very focused, is focusing on only one aspect of life, whereas Judaism and we Muslims believe Islam is a way of life. So I would like as well, if you would like to share with our students, how do you respond, for example, from a Jewish perspective, according to Judaism, and you are living in a country like Singapore, and say, how do you facilitate the needs of your community when you are having this kind of reaction from the outsiders? So I appreciate very much, Chief Rabbi. This is, I mean, indeed, this is a good, I mean, occasion that we are having with you. We hope that this will continue.
Yes, God willing.
I thank Dr. Nu for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate the question. I think it's very meaningful. If you don't mind, maybe if I could ask you the second question, if you could elaborate on that, because you said, how as an observant Jew, how do I interact with other people of other religions? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, this how according to the teachings of Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So how that, and that it shows a kind of appreciation that not only that you get from the belief in God that you have, but as well how it'll be your relationship with the others. As I mentioned, this is my point. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So let me first of all mention something. It has to do with the first question you asked, and that is that I'm going to go back into the 10 Commandments. Of course, I'm sure all of you know about the 10 Commandments. If you look at the 10 Commandments, they're divided in two categories. You have the first 5 commandments that have to do with our obligations towards the Almighty, right? The things that we will define our relationship to God, which is to believe in one God, right? For example, to observe the Sabbath is another example, right? But then you have the other 5 commandments that have to do with our dealings and our interaction with another human being. So which means to say that, and in fact, one of the cardinal commandments in the Torah is one of the 613 commandments is to love your fellow Jew as yourself, right? And that is, of course, the idea that every human being is made in the image of God. And so therefore, at the very core here, I'm not asked to tolerate someone else. I must seek to see the divine in him. I must see in him a reflection of God. That has, of course, implications that are tremendous implications, right? In our ability to peel the layers of the external personality, right, of an individual. Very often what you see in a person is just the external aspect of who he is, but the core of every human being is a divine soul, a core of divine energy. And I think if you relate on the level of the soul, I think then it becomes totally immaterial what religion you belong to or don't belong to. At the end of the day, we very much believe as Jews that we are in a partnership with the whole of mankind to bring about a specific purpose. We want to make the world a better place. We want to change the world. As I mentioned, we want the world to be an abode and a dwelling for God, that God could, so to speak, come and dwell with us and feel comfortable with his children. And I think if you have this basic idea, barriers and differences at the end of the day are necessary, because there must be diversity. You cannot have, God is the God of the whole world, of the whole of mankind, but Judaism is not the religion of the whole mankind. So the fact that you have more languages, so to speak, every religion is a different language, right? And we speak to God and relate to God and connect to God in each in our own way, but that doesn't mean to say that there is something exclusivist about us, or where there is an absolute truth that precludes the possibility for another person to relate to God in his or her own way. And so that is really, I think, what is really of, I think the tragedy of our day is that, we kill people and we persecute people in the name of God, which is a total aberration, right? If you believe in God and the fact that God created every human being in his image, and that, Maimonides says something very interesting, and I want to end with this. It's an unbelievable statement that he makes in his magnum opus, which is a code of Jewish law. We call it the Yad HaChazakah, the mighty hand. And over there, it's actually in the conclusion of his code, where he says that God brought about Christianity and Islam to the world in order to bring the whole of mankind closer to him, to discover him, to bring about an awareness of monotheism to the world, which is an incredible idea if you take into account that it was pronounced 850 years ago. So I think, when we actually, when you peel away all the nonsense, you actually get to the core and you see that the message of Judaism really is, with all the differences, you know, we live, unfortunately, with the burden of horrible conflicts between our different people. And I think you have the Arab-Israeli conflict that is an example of that, of an aberration. You know, of course, it's a tragedy, but what I'm saying is it's such an absurdity, because at the end of the day, we really, at the core, share the same family and share the same values. And that is something really which we ought to think about a tremendous lot, you know, before we speak of any political views, for instance, which bring instant animosity and negative energy to any debate, because we lose sight, or if I might say, we lose the forest from the trees.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi. We have 4 questions from our students. I'll go through one by one for you to give a response. The first question from Sister Amna Yaqub. Greetings, Rabbi. What happens if a Jew fails to observe Sabbath due to unavoidable circumstances? For example, can't get off work on Sabbath.
Well, you know, if you can get off work on Sabbath, in our religious dimension, we would say to this person, look for another job, right? Look for another job. We cannot sacrifice or compromise on such a basic tenet of faith, something of such cardinal importance as the Sabbath, because of a job. Again, there is nothing, you know, people sometimes think that, you know, that something as your work is actually could be in conflict with your faith. But if you believe, again, if you believe in God, not a God in crutches, a real God, a God that is eternal, that is immutable, He's the one that created your job. How can that be in conflict with your observance? It's a ridiculous idea. I mean, I'm not making fun of you, please don't get me wrong. All I'm saying is that truly, if someone says, you better work on the Sabbath, otherwise I'll fire you, then the response has to be, okay, fire me, what can I do? I'll look for a different job.
Thank you, Rabbi. Question number 2 from Siti Nadira. I have a question. Do all Jews obligated to follow all 613 commandments?
Yes. Yes, all Jews have to observe the 613 commandments. As I mentioned before, many of them are no longer applicable today. They're relevant, but no longer applicable today, because they involve the service in the temple, which we do not have at present. So yes, we observe all the commandments as much as we physically can, as much as they can be observed.
The next question from Amirul Shahrizal. What is the name of God in Judaism?
God has 7 names in Judaism. Names which are basically names that show the way that God manifests himself. So we have this concept in Jewish mysticism of 10 supernal divine attributes, where God reveals himself, for example, through the attribute of mercy, kindness, judgment, and so on and so forth. And so each of these names is going to symbolize that. You know, these names are used in different contexts in a different way. In the Bible, they're used throughout the Bible, or even in our prayers in a specific context, in a specific way. But in short, that's what it is.
Thank you. Next question from Hong Hao Na. Thanks for the lecture. I want to know, when a Jew travel, he or she couldn't find the prescribed food, what is the alternative for him or her?
Eat fruits. You know, it's not something, I don't have kosher food, so what to do? I'm going to go have the Big Mac. No. If you don't have the prescribed food, first of all, you can prepare yourself. You know, I will give you an example. Well, of course, now we don't travel anymore so much, but when we do travel, right? In terms of air travel, you can order a kosher meal. But let's say sometimes, you know, they forget the kosher meal. Happens more than once. I always come prepared with my sandwiches. I always have a snack. I always have something with me, right? If not, then I'll make do with fruits or whatever it is I can have, which is not in compromise. It's you know, it's all a question again as to whether your life revolves around your Judaism or your Judaism around your life. So, you know, it's nothing to do with convenience, because these things don't change. That's the approach in Judaism.
Next question from Nurul Afika Ismail. Is it possible for non-Jews to convert to Judaism?
Yes, it is. You may convert to Judaism. However, in Jewish law, we initially will try to persuade people not to convert. In fact, in Jewish law, we're supposed to tell a person, you know, I don't think it's a good idea. And we have to reject it 3 times. And it's only after the person really convinces and shows with his behavior that it is something that he desires with every fiber of his being, only then will we consider it, because we want to see a genuine motive. So again, we're not looking, you know, there's no hard sell, there's no soft sell, there's no marketing, there's nothing. We are basically telling a person who comes to convert to us, whether he is Chinese or Christian or Muslim or Zoroastrian or whatnot, we'll say to him, look here, I think that you might want to go and explore your own tradition and look in your own garden before you come to us. Now, if a person really wants to convert and that's his desire, we will not stop him, but we are very strict in the sense of, for example, sometimes people want to convert because of a boyfriend, girlfriend. That's you know, that's where we don't want to see things going, you know, in that direction. So this is really the idea that, you know, ultimately we're dealing with souls. The idea of conversion means to say that there's something happening spiritually with that soul that's at play, and we show tremendous sensitivity to that, because, you know, it's no trifle matter. It's not that someone wants to convert, okay, comes some holy water, abracadabra, okay, here you're Jewish, now go back home. No, that's not what it is. There's got to be a change that starts from the bottom up, and where a person's life is totally transformed. To be Jewish is arguably, you might say, kind of tough. It's a tough life, right? And so you must accept all the observance of all the commandments and so on and so forth. Only after this takes a bit of time. Actually, it takes about 2.5 to 3 years to complete the whole conversion process. And so it's a major decision a person takes in his life to do something like this, and especially if it involves other family members.
Thank you, Rabbi. Next question from Ahmad Firdaus. Rabbi, I'm pretty sure that you are aware that Prophet Muhammad is a central figure of Islam. Can you perhaps explain what is his position from the Jewish perspective?
Well, we feel, as I explained before, and as I mentioned, you know, when I mentioned Maimonides and the statement that he made in his magnum opus, and again, I stress Maimonides. Why? Because Maimonides lived in a Muslim society. He was the private physician to Salah ad-Din himself, the Sultan Salah ad-Din. So we're talking about a person who was intimately knowledgeable with Islam. And when he comes and he tells you that God brought about the advent of Islam to bring part of mankind closer to God, to discover God and have a relationship and a connection to God, that says it all. That says it all.
Thank you. Next questions from Nor Persona. What's the difference between Israel community and Jewish?
You mean between being an Israeli or being Jewish?
Yeah.
Is that what the question is?
I think that's what it means between these two, Israel community and Jewish.
Right. Well, you know, so I think it's really important when you say Israel, what is meant by Israel? What is the meaning of that word? Many people don't know, you know, it's just interesting. Israel in the Bible is mentioned as the name of Jacob, Yaqub in Islam. So if you look in the Bible, the angel says to Jacob, your name will no longer be only Jacob, it will also be Israel, which means to say the one that rules, the one that is given the grace of God in this world. And so Israel, you know, is essentially a Jewish concept, okay? But in modern Israel, as a secular country, it was founded on a secular platform, which to me is, again, you know, an aberration, I think. But when we speak of an Israeli, well, then you have Christian Israelis, you have Muslim Israelis. It's an aberration in terms of, you know, in terms of the identities that are involved here, right? And of course, we are proud. I am, as a Jew, although I'm not an Israeli, but I'm proud of the fact that Israel has citizens of every faith, right? But there is no contradiction, I would say, with being an Israeli and a Muslim, or an Israeli a Christian, or an Israeli Jew. I think the idea of Israel as a modern state is what we conceive also as a Jewish state. Obviously, it's the ancestral homeland of Jewish people. And I know this is controversial, but it's important to understand how Jews, you know, from their lens, how they see this through the prism of their own religion, of their own religious tradition. I think that this will define for us what is Israel. It's the ancestral homeland of Jewish people, but Israel has always had people of different faiths living in it, and the fact that they have this citizenship is not at all a contradiction to our, you know, to us living together in peace and harmony.
Thank you. Next, from Muhammad Khairul Azam, what are the differences between Orthodox Judaism and the conservative, Reform and Reconstructionist movement?
It's a very good question. I believe I touched on that a little bit early on when I spoke about the revelation on Sinai. Again, if you conceive of the revelation on Mount Sinai, God revealed himself to the Jewish people as a moment that is divine in nature, where God shared his message with us, and therefore, by extension of that, to the whole of mankind. You must then take that in the Orthodox, in the Orthodox understanding of it. You must take that as something that is immutable and that is eternal and not given to change. So if God says keep the Sabbath, he did not mean that the Sabbath may have been relevant at a certain time and is no longer relevant today. You see what I'm saying? This is essentially what Orthodox Judaism is. It is an uncompromising approach to Judaism where all commandments must be observed, all the commandments of the Torah. That is to say, according to the written Torah and oral Torah, as I explained, whereas conservative and Reformed Jews have a sort of democratic Judaism, pick and choose. And I'm not making fun, but I'm saying to you things as they are factually. Many Reformed Jews, I've actually met Reform rabbis who profess not to believe in God. I mean, this is as far as it goes. So you have atheist Reform rabbis. Go on the internet, you can probably find some. So you see, it can go quite far. And of course, to us, that is a very big red line, right? That we cannot cross. So, you know, there's nothing about our tradition that can be compromised upon. Now, of course, that depends, you know, when you have this particular scenario, right? If a person is about to die and you need to, for example, cook on the Sabbath, so life is holy and the sanctity of life is such that we have to desecrate the Sabbath in order to save someone's life. But that's a different story, obviously. But if you deal with the corpus of religious tradition, we believe that it's divine in origin. We're in the Reform, certainly in the Reform tradition, it's not. Conservative Judaism is closer to Orthodoxy, but has veered off in a major way in the past 20, 30 years. And Reconstructionist is, you know, it's something that is a very loose adaptation of the ideals of the Torah, and you know, I think exists more in a humanistic type of approach than anything else, which again is, you know, we have this in America much more, by the way, than any other place in the world. I think, you know, the way I look at Jews, is very, very different. I look at Jews that have had the blessing of being connected to their traditions, that have had the blessing and privilege to have been connected to their roots and their heritage, and those who unfortunately have not. I don't call them Orthodox, I don't call them conservative, I don't call them Reform. It's either you're Jewish or you're not Jewish, that's all. I'm totally colorblind to these denominations because they mean absolutely nothing to me, right? If we're Jews, well, we're Jews. Okay, so you're a bit less observant, a bit more observant. That's your business. That's between you and God. But to me, a Jew is my family, right? Another Jew is my brother, my sister, right? And so I think it's true that to the outside, it may look as if you have these major fault lines, and there are major differences, you know, between these theological approaches. But I think that at the core, the fact that we're Jews and that we belong to the same family, to us, that is really essential.
Thank you, Rabbi. Next question from Faiz. Rabbi, is Judaism strictly inherited religion? The first part of the question. The second is, does Judaism has kind of evangelization movements?
Okay, so Judaism is inherited in the sense that you might say a Jew, in order to be Jewish, has to be born of a Jewish mother. So in other words, we follow matrilineal descent, not patrilineal descent. And also a Jew can be a Jew by virtue of him converted according to Jewish observance. What people call, again, Orthodox Judaism, I hate to use that word, but if a person takes upon himself the observance of the Torah and the commandment and he enters the Jewish nation, he is then Jewish. So it can either inherited or acquired in the ways that I've just described right now. Do we have any evangelical movements? As I explained, no. That is a total that would be a distortion, right, of the very basic ideals of the Torah to go and evangelize. We are not into the business of marketing Judaism to the outside. We believe it's relevant to Jews. Now, we do plenty evangelization, but we're Jews. So we go to Jews who, you know, who are a bit on the margin, and we try to bring them, you know, to experience a certain closeness with their heritage and their tradition. That, yes, we do that, but not to non-Jews. We just don't think it's fair. And in a sense, we don't think it's fair because if God made someone a Christian and I come and say, no, I think you should be Jewish, I'm basically saying to God, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, you know, I'm vulgarizing it, but that's really what it is. It's just not our business to intervene in those affairs.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think the remaining two last question, perhaps, or students want to write more. From Asim Shamsul Bahri. Jews fasting in the 10 Muharram, Ashura or Tishri every year, or remember Moses saved from Pharaoh?
I know that's not what we fast. So let me explain in short why we fast. We're all familiar with the sin of the golden calf. I think you probably have heard about the sin, which is where the Jewish people sinned with the sin of idol worship 40 days after the revelation on Sinai. So they just came out of Egypt. 50 days later, they experienced this great revelation. 40 days later, many of them sinned. The sin that was a sin that has cosmic repercussions that impacted our entire destiny and our entire history. You know, there's not enough time to go through all this. That's a discussion on its own. But the point here is that it took Moses a long time to get God to forgive the Jewish people, right? And so it took him about 120 days. So from the moment that the sin happened until Moses got the full forgiveness of God, it took that long. And so the actual forgiveness, the actual atonement was granted on the 10th of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippur, which is why that day is called the Day of Atonement, because that's when God atones. It's a day that is auspicious for atonement, where our sins, if we prepare for this holiday, if we prepare for this time, the Almighty wipes out, so to speak, wipes out our sins and our iniquities.
Last question, perhaps, from, again, Amna Yaqub, or have another question coming up. Amna Yaqub is asking, are there any instances of converts facing discrimination in the Jewish community? Do we find any rulings against these prejudices in the Jewish teaching?
Is there discrimination? Maybe there is. I can't speak for all Jews. You have Jews that are prejudiced. That's a fact. And I think, really, when a convert expresses the wish to be a part of the Jewish people, I think that deep down they know that this is not going to be a walk in the park, right? It's not going to be a walk in the park because you are really putting behind your entire history, right? Your family history, your ties to spirituality, all of this is literally part of a past which is no longer relevant to you. And I think, well, of course, it's relevant in maybe a more practical way, but not so much in a spiritual way. So we consider, for example, when a person is converted, that this is his birthday. He was literally born on that day, from our tradition, okay? So is it tough? Do you have sometimes tensions? Maybe you do. I think that the commandment in the Torah to love the convert is, in fact, so important that the Torah mentions it 37 times, to love the stranger, right? And why? Because, God knows. God knows that someone is going to want to become part of the Jewish people, and he's going to face difficulties. And so there is an exhortation to love the stranger, to love the convert. So yes, you probably have tension somewhere. I think on the whole, things work pretty well. We have a few converts in our community, and they're really we see them as part of our extended family here. That's in Singapore, and I know my father's been a rabbi in Belgium for the past 50 years. We've had many converts over the years, of course, who have joined us, and it's the same thing. But there may be, unfortunately, sometimes when Jews don't live up to the ideals they should, and not treat the convert properly. I'm not going to say that it's all rosy and hunky dory. Now, when it comes to the second part of your question, do we find any rulings? No, there is no such a thing as a ruling that is prejudiced against converts in the corpus of Jewish teachings. You don't find that. Certainly not a ruling, but you do have, of course, the idea that you have to be very sensitive to the convert, not to remind them of his past, not to intimate to him that he's in some way inferior to you. And that's the reason why God keeps saying in the Bible, don't you forget even for a moment that you are yourselves converts. And that is really at the core. We are ourselves converts. And that's how we started out. So we certainly should not denigrate the person who is chosen to literally put everything on the line to be a part of the Jewish people.
Thank you, Rabbi. Last question perhaps for today from Naura Safira. How is Rabbi chosen in Judaism? Is everyone of Judaism can be Rabbi?
Yes. So this is a very interesting question. Why? Because, there is a teaching in our Talmud that says like this, that says the Torah lies in the corner. Everyone who wants it, bend down and take it. So, by the way, quite interesting that you asked this question because, as I said, the questions sometimes they float so many different ideas. If you look in the history of the world, we have become, in terms of mankind, we have become literate. Human beings, individuals have become literate only in the past 250. There was an elite that was very happy to keep people ignorant, keep them illiterate, keep them totally ignorant of everything, and that way you control them and you have power over them. In Judaism, it is the total opposite. So, an example, you have in the Bible the story of Moses that says to God, it's too hard for me to lead his people alone. What does God say? Let me share of your spirit to the 70 elders so that they can in turn be inspired spiritually to be able to lead as well together with you, to share that burden with you. What happens is that two individuals, Eldad and Medad, that's their names in the Bible, they, because they have now some of the spirit of Moses, they begin to prophesy. And they, you know, prophecy, it's a big deal. If you were not a prophet and now you experience prophecy, that is one heck of a gift. And so they can't stop prophesying. They have such spiritual ecstasy, they want to continue and continue. According to some of our commentaries, they were actually prophesying that Moses would not have the merit to enter the land of Israel. When Joshua hears this, the one who succeeds Moses, he says, Moses, look at them. Look at them. They're prophesying. They continue to prophesy. Such a flagrant disrespect to you. What is Moses' response to Joshua? He says, what are you upset? May it be the will of God that we should all be prophets. Moses wants that there should not be only one Moses. Moses wants that everyone should be Moses. That is such a powerful idea because, and by the way, there is a law in our Jewish tradition that says that every city must have a school. And we're talking back to the days of Moses. There was never in our history a time that a city did not have a school. You educate your children. From the age of 3, they must begin to be literate. So this is basically totally in contrast to these different approaches over time, where to have the privilege of education was, again, the privilege of select few people. And, you know, I think in Judaism, the idea is that everyone has the potential to be a leader. And that's what it means. If you want to, you know, you want to devote your life to be a rabbi, to be a spiritual leader, to help build and develop and nurture a community and teach and share of the Jewish heritage and Jewish tradition, I think that's your prerogative. Everyone has the potential to do that.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I think we come to the end of the session. If you have any closing remark, Rabbi?
Well, my closing remarks are that this type of work is, I think I began with this, you know, is essential. I think that what is done here with the able leadership of your teachers, and I'm talking here, of course, of Professor No, as well as Dr. Fatmir, and everyone in the faculty is what allows us to understand each other better, and to look at another Jew when I'm sure you'll meet Jews, you know, later on in your lives, and I think what this allows to do, what these sorts of sessions, what they allow us to do is to later on become ambassadors for the common good. Each of you can then go around and explain to people, hey, you know, what you think about Jews might not be the most educated approach, and there is much more to what you think. You know, so an example of this, you know, is I was giving a talk here in Singapore to a multi-faith forum, which it was about a religious concept, and they were on the panel people of 3 different faiths. I was one of them, and there is a child that got up in the crowd there and said to me, you know, why is it that Jews persecute Arabs? So, you know, when he stood up to ask that question, there are 2 things that you could have done, right? I guess I could have told this kid, well, you know, you're quite an arrogant kid, and I think what you're saying is very, very disrespectful, and you know, I think you ought to really refrain from making such remarks, or whatever, something to that effect. What I said to this child is, you know, I'm happy that you had the courage to voice whatever it is you have in your heart. I applaud that. I admire that. But by the same token, please tell me, do you know what it means to be Jewish? Do you have an idea of what it means to be an Israeli? Do you have some knowledge about the story of the Jewish people? And he said, no. And I said, that's the problem. It's because we are ignorant of certain issues that we can make such sweeping statements. And really, when they say knowledge is power, it's so true. What we're doing here right now is empowering us to be ambassadors to literally change the world, one person at a time. We don't make, we're not going to make, we're not Moses, okay? But we can each make an impact. And I think that's something that, is really a beautiful part of this work that we do together. So I want to bless all of you. If my blessings make a difference on high, I don't know, but that you should have the success in whatever it is you undertake, materially and spiritually, that you should have, of course, the blessing of health and happiness, and that we should meet again, as we say in Arabic, bil farah, only in joy, and that we should share with each other as we've shared today. All the very best to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi, for very enlightening talk. I think whatever you have presented just now, more than an hour, I think, is just on time. Is complementing what we learn in our classes on Judaism. I'm very sure, looking at the comments and questions, I think we have more than 12, 13 questions. I thought there was no question, but see, it come one after another. See how we don't have this opportunity, and you are right. Sometimes we refrain ourselves from connecting with one another. And I think behind this COVID-19 pandemic, we can see the silver lining, which is we are now easier connected online. I could not imagine last year when we met, and then you are telling me if there is any opportunity you want to talk to my student. I could not think how, when, and those questions. But now the opportunity is presented in front of us. Without you traveling and we traveling, we are at our comfort places, and we can exchange thoughts and idea one another. Wow. Once again, Rabbi, very thank you from all of us here, from our students, our colleague at the university, and for sure this is not going to be the last. I think we look for each academic calendar will have more students. I think this course has been more popular now because we are bringing people like you to talk to our students and enrich their understanding of one another, especially our religions. I think it's a very beneficial session. We wish you very safe and health in Singapore, and for our students, keep yourself safe as well. And,
thank you. Keep all safe. Yep.
Yeah, keep safe. We'll keep in touch, Rabbi, as usual. If you have anything, stay in touch. We are connected.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to all. We end with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam. All the best, my friends. Be well, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Be well.